You think you know Pennsylvania. Rolling hills dotted with colonial homesteads, Revolutionary War battlefields where musket smoke once hung thick in the air, and Amish farmland stretching toward distant ridges. But what if I told you that beneath these familiar landscapes lies something far older, far stranger, and utterly unexplained? What if the ground you walk on in the Keystone State conceals evidence of civilizations that shouldn't exist according to our textbooks, of construction techniques that baffle modern engineers, and of ritual practices so enigmatic they've sparked a century of academic debate? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on Pennsylvania's hidden past, and I promise you, nothing will look quite the same when we're done. We're talking about massive earthworks that predate European contact by millennia, carved stones bearing symbols no one can definitively translate, and burial sites containing remains that challenge everything we thought we knew about human migration into North America. These aren't fringe theories whispered in dimly lit forums. These are legitimate archaeological puzzles that have stumped researchers, sparked heated conferences, and remain stubbornly unsolved despite decades of investigation. You're about to discover that Pennsylvania's secrets run deeper than Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. They run thousands of years deep, and they're still keeping their silence. We'll walk together through fog-bound valleys where ancient peoples built monuments aligned to celestial events with shocking precision. We'll examine artifacts that suggest trade networks spanning continents centuries before Columbus. We'll confront the possibility that our conventional timeline of settlement and development in this region is incomplete, perhaps even fundamentally flawed. And here's what makes this journey so compelling. Every mystery we explore today is real, documented, and sitting in museum collections or protected archaeological sites right now, waiting for someone to crack the code. So settle in, because for the next hour, we're going beneath the surface of Pennsylvania's past, and what we find there might just rewrite the story of ancient America. Picture yourself standing in a meadow near Montoursville, Lycoming County, on a morning when autumn mist clings to the Susquehanna River Valley. The year is 1916, and a local farmer named Samuel Reichert is clearing land for spring planting when his plow strikes something massive just inches below the topsoil. What emerges over the next 3 days of careful excavation will send ripples through the archaeological community that persists to this day: the Montoursville Stone Crescent, a precisely curved wall of fitted limestone blocks stretching nearly 400 feet in a perfect arc, its stones weighing between 800 and 1,400 pounds each, assembled without mortar yet fitted so tightly that even now, over a century after its discovery, you can't slide a knife blade between most joints. The structure dates to approximately 800 BC, placing it firmly in what archaeologists call the early woodland period, a time when the dominant narrative suggests the region's inhabitants were small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers with limited architectural ambitions. Yet here sits evidence of coordinated labor, sophisticated geometric planning, and engineering knowledge that seems wildly out of sync with that picture. The stones themselves aren't local. Petrographic analysis conducted in 1973 traced them to a limestone formation 37 miles to the northwest, meaning someone organized the transport of roughly 600 tons of stone across rugged terrain using technology we can only guess at. Drag sleds? Wooden rollers? River rafts? No one knows for certain, and that's just the beginning of the puzzle. The real mystery kicks in when you examine what this crescent was actually for. The opening faces due east, aligned to within 2 degrees of the equinox sunrise, a precision that cannot be accidental. Excavations along the interior curve uncovered layers of charcoal, burned animal bone, primarily white-tailed deer and elk, and hundreds of small quartz crystals that had been intentionally placed in circular patterns around shallow fire pits. Radiocarbon dating of the charcoal layers spans from 800 BC to roughly 400 BC, indicating the site wasn't used just once but returned to repeatedly over 4 centuries. That kind of sustained ritual use implies this wasn't a momentary whim but a deeply embedded cultural practice, perhaps connected to seasonal ceremonies or astronomical observations. Some researchers, like Dr. Helena Cord from Bucknell University, argue the crescent functioned as a communal gathering place for multiple bands who came together during critical times of the year, spring planting, fall harvest, winter solstice, to reinforce social bonds and conduct ceremonies that validated their cosmology. The quartz crystals, she suggests, may have been offerings or markers for specific families or clans, each one representing a lineage's participation in the event. It's a compelling theory, grounded in what we know about similar structures elsewhere in the eastern woodlands. But here's where it gets tricky. In 1959, an independent researcher named Martin Kellerman published a controversial analysis suggesting the Montoursville Crescent's dimensions encode mathematical relationships that wouldn't be formalized in Western mathematics until the Greeks. Specifically, he claimed the ratio of the arc's radius to the thickness of the wall approximates phi, the golden ratio, to within 3%. Mainstream archaeologists largely dismiss this as numerological cherry-picking. If you measure enough features of any structure, you'll eventually find ratios that match famous constants by chance. Yet Kellerman wasn't easily deterred. He documented 17 other features of the site: spacing between internal fire pits, the average weight of the stones, even the depth of the foundation trench, that all seemed to cluster around multiples and divisions of a base unit he calculated at roughly 41 centimeters. Was this intentional? Did the builders possess a standardized measurement system and sophisticated mathematical knowledge? Or are we seeing patterns that exist only in our own need to find order? The debate hasn't been settled, partly because full excavation of the site was never completed. In 1968, a housing development project threatened the western portion of the crescent, and emergency salvage archaeology recovered what it could before bulldozers moved in. Today, only about 60% of the original structure remains accessible for study, and what was lost beneath suburban lawns and driveways might have held the answers we're looking for. Then there's the matter of the skeletal remains. During those 1968 salvage excavations, archaeologists uncovered a burial at the crescent's northernmost point, a single individual interred in a stone cist, a box made from flat limestone slabs, dated to approximately 650 BC. The skeleton was remarkably complete, and initial field reports noted it was of unusual size. When physical anthropologist Dr. Raymond Stauffer examined the remains in 1970, he recorded a reconstructed height of 6 feet 9 inches, towering over the average stature for early woodland males in the region, which hovers around 5 feet 6. The individual showed no signs of gigantism-related pathology, no abnormal bone growth, no evidence of pituitary disorders, just a very, very tall person. Stauffer's conclusion was straightforward: genetic variation, nothing more. But you can imagine how this discovery fueled decades of speculation. Fringe theories about giants, lost tribes descended from biblical Nephilim, even extraterrestrial intervention, all latched onto this single skeleton as proof of their claims. The truth is almost certainly more mundane yet still fascinating. Ancient populations exhibited the same genetic diversity we see today, and occasionally someone was just exceptionally tall. Still, the romanticized notion of the giant of Montoursville persists in local folklore, and tour guides in the area still whisper about it to curious visitors. It's a reminder that archaeological mysteries don't exist in a vacuum. They become woven into the cultural fabric of the places they're found, taking on lives of their own. What makes the Montoursville Stone Crescent so enduringly mysterious isn't any single anomaly but the cluster of unanswered questions it presents. Who organized the labor to transport and place these stones? What specific astronomical or seasonal events were they marking? Did the mathematical relationships Kellerman identified represent genuine knowledge or coincidental measurement? And why, after 400 years of use, was the site apparently abandoned around 400 BC, left to slowly vanish beneath soil and vegetation until a farmer's plow rediscovered it 2 millennia later? We still don't know. The site sits today behind a chain-link fence, periodically visited by archaeologists and amateur historians alike, its stones weathered but enduring, holding their secrets tight. When you stand there in the early morning, when the mist rolls in from the river and the light hits the stones at just the right angle, you can almost hear the drums, almost see the fires burning, almost feel the presence of the people who once gathered here with such purpose and precision. Almost. But not quite. And that gap between what we can prove and what we can imagine, that's where the real mystery lives. Now let's travel south to Washington County, to a windswept ridge overlooking the Monongahela River, where one of Pennsylvania's most perplexing discoveries was made not by archaeologists, but by a road construction crew in August 1934. They were cutting through a hillside to widen what's now Route 88 when their blasting exposed a cavity in the bedrock, a natural limestone cave that had been deliberately sealed with massive sandstone slabs sometime in the distant past. When engineers crawled inside to assess structural stability, they found themselves in a chamber roughly 30 feet in diameter and 12 feet high, its floor covered in a thick layer of white ash, and its walls covered in something no one expected: hundreds of carefully incised geometric symbols. Spirals, concentric circles, zigzag lines, ladder patterns, and what appear to be stylized representations of animals, deer, turtles, snakes, and possibly bears, carved into the soft limestone with remarkable clarity. This is the Monongahela sealed chamber, and despite 89 years of study, no one has definitively explained what it was for, who created it, or what the symbols mean. The first challenge was dating the site. Organic material is scarce in the chamber. The ash layer yielded charcoal fragments that were radiocarbon dated to approximately 1100 C, placing the site's use in what's known as the Monongahela culture period, a late prehistoric tradition that flourished along the Monongahela River drainage between roughly 1000 C and 1600 C. These were horticulturalists, growing maize, beans, and squash in river bottom gardens, living in circular wooden houses arranged in palisade villages, and creating a distinctive style of pottery. We know they traded extensively. Shell beads from the Gulf Coast and copper from the Great Lakes have been found in Monongahela sites, but their symbolic vocabulary remains largely opaque. The carvings in the sealed chamber don't match anything found on their pottery or other portable art, and that's the first major puzzle. Were the chamber symbols part of a secret ritual tradition, something too sacred to be displayed publicly? Or do they represent a much older symbolic system, carved by an earlier culture and later sealed away by the Monongahela people who found them? The spiral motifs have drawn particular attention. Spirals are nearly universal in human symbolic expression, appearing in cultures across the globe from Neolithic Europe to ancient China to ancestral Puebloan rock art in the American Southwest. But what they mean varies wildly: migration journeys, the path of the soul, celestial motion, water currents, the coiling of a serpent. In the Monongahela sealed chamber, there are 47 distinct spiral carvings, ranging from tight single coils to elaborate multi-loop designs that span 2 feet across. Dr. Patricia Vance, an archaeologist with the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, spent 3 years documenting and analyzing these spirals in the 1980s. She proposed that they might represent genealogical records, with each loop or coil signifying a generation within a family line. By her count, some of the largest spirals could represent up to 12 generations, potentially covering nearly 3 centuries of lineage. It's a beautiful theory, one that transforms the chamber from a mysterious cave into an ancestral shrine, a place where family histories were quite literally carved in stone. But there's no way to prove it. Without a Rosetta Stone, some bilingual text or clear contextual association, we're left inferring meaning from form alone, a notoriously unreliable method. Other researchers take a completely different approach. Dr. Leonard Hurst, a cognitive archaeologist from Penn State, argues that the chamber was a vision quest site, a place where individuals, possibly adolescents undergoing initiation rites, were sealed inside for days or weeks in total darkness to induce altered states of consciousness. The ash layer, he points out, could be from fires that consumed psychoactive plants. The region has several native species, including Deuterostromonium and certain varieties of tobacco, known to have been used ritually by indigenous groups. In such a state, participants might have experienced vivid hallucinations, which they then attempted to record on the chamber walls, creating a visual map of their spiritual journey. Hurst's theory draws on ethnographic parallels from Plains tribes, where vision quests in isolated caves or hilltop enclosures were central to establishing adult identity and spiritual power. It's compelling, especially when you consider that many of the animal figures on the walls are depicted in strange, contorted postures: snakes with multiple heads, deer with elongated bodies, turtles whose shells seem to ripple like water, imagery that could reflect hallucinogenic experiences. But critics note that Hirst's interpretation relies heavily on analogies drawn from cultures hundreds of miles away and separated by centuries, and there's no direct chemical evidence of psychoactive residue in the ash samples. The debate continues. Then there's the matter of the ceiling itself. The sandstone slabs used to block the chamber entrance weighed an estimated 1,200 pounds each, and geological analysis shows they were quarried from an outcrop 7 miles to the northeast. Why go to such extraordinary effort to seal a cave? Was the chamber considered dangerous, a portal to the underworld that needed to be closed? Was it a tomb for someone of immense importance, their resting place sanctified and hidden? Or was it a time capsule of sorts, a deliberate act of preservation by a culture that sensed its own decline and wanted to leave something behind? In 1951, a folklorist named Edna Corliss collected oral histories from descendants of the region's Lenape and Shawnee communities, some of whom recalled stories about the Whispering Cave on the ridge above the Monongahela, a place their grandparents said was forbidden, where the voices of the ancient ones could still be heard if you listened closely. Corliss was careful to note that these stories might have been influenced by newspaper coverage of the 1934 discovery. Cultural memories are fluid, and narratives reshape themselves around new information, but the consistency of the theme was striking. Multiple informants described the cave as a place of power, a boundary between the living world and the realm of spirits, not to be entered lightly or disturbed without proper ritual. And here's the part that keeps me awake at night. We don't know if the chamber is unique, or if there are others like it scattered across Pennsylvania's ridges and hollows, still sealed, still waiting. Limestone bedrock riddled with caves is common throughout the Appalachian region, and most have never been systematically surveyed. How many more sealed chambers might there be, their entrances hidden beneath centuries of soil and vegetation, their symbols unseen by modern eyes? The thought is both thrilling and humbling. The Monongahela sealed chamber was found by accident, a quirk of road construction that could easily have gone differently. If the blasting had been angled 10 feet to the north, the chamber would still be hidden, its secrets intact. We still don't know what message the carvers intended to leave, whether their symbols were records, rituals, or something else entirely. And unless we find a second chamber with clearer context, we may never know. But when you visit the site today, it's been stabilized and occasionally open for research. You can still feel the weight of intention in those carved lines, the sense that someone, long ago, worked by flickering torchlight to leave behind something they believed would matter. And maybe that belief, that impulse to mark stone and preserve meaning, is the real universal truth we're uncovering. Let's shift eastward now, to the forested slopes of Centre County, where in 1872 a surveying team mapping railroad routes through the Allegheny Front stumbled across something that has defied explanation for over a century and a half. They called it the Blackstone Serpent, and if you saw it from the air, which few did until aerial photography became common in the mid-20th century, you'd understand why. It's a low earthen embankment, grass-covered now but originally built up with dark clay and stone, that winds across a valley floor in a sinuous S-curve for nearly half a mile, its width averaging about 15 feet, and its height ranging from 2 to 4 feet above the surrounding grade. From ground level, it looks like a natural ridge, nothing special. From above, the intentionality is unmistakable. This is a serpent, head raised at the eastern terminus near a small creek, tail tapering to a point near a rock outcrop in the west, with 7 distinct coils along its length. It's not as massive as the famous Serpent Mound in Ohio, but it's the only effigy earthwork of its kind in Pennsylvania, and no one knows who built it, when, or why. Dating earthworks is notoriously difficult. Unlike stone structures or organic artifacts, dirt doesn't lend itself to radiocarbon or thermoluminescence dating unless you find charcoal, pottery, or other datable material incorporated into the construction. At the Blackstone Serpent, initial excavations in 1923 recovered only a handful of stone flakes and 1 broken projectile point, a small, triangular form consistent with late woodland technology, suggesting a construction date somewhere between 900 CE and 1400 CE, but the sample size was too small to be conclusive. More recent work in 1998, using optically stimulated luminescence on quartz grains embedded in the earthwork, yielded dates ranging from 1150 C to 1280 C, a span that frustratingly bridges the transition between the late woodland and late prehistoric periods, two cultural phases with somewhat different settlement patterns and subsistence strategies. So we have a general time frame but no precision, and precision matters when you're trying to connect a monument like this to specific cultural practices. The serpent's orientation has sparked considerable interest. Its head points almost exactly toward the summer solstice sunrise, and its tail aligns with the winter solstice sunset, a dual solar alignment that can't be coincidental. Dr. Marcus Thorne, an archaeoastronomer who studied the site extensively in the 1980s, documented 17 sidelines from various points along the serpent's body to prominent landscape features, distant ridgelines, notches in the mountains where the sun rises or sets at key dates, even the position of the North Star in 1200 C when viewed from the serpent's central coil. Thorne's conclusion was that the Blackstone Serpent functioned as a monumental calendar, a landscape-scale device for tracking seasonal changes critical to agricultural timing. The 7 coils, he suggested, might correspond to 7 key agricultural events in the annual cycle: ground thaw, planting, first shoots, high summer, harvest preparation, harvest completion, and ground freeze. It's an elegant theory, and it fits with what we know about other cultures' use of monumental architecture to encode astronomical knowledge. But it's also speculative. Without written records or oral traditions that explicitly connect the serpent to calendar keeping, we're inferring purpose from form, which is always risky. Alternative interpretations abound. Some researchers argue the serpent wasn't functional at all but purely symbolic, a representation of a creation myth or cosmological narrative. Serpents hold powerful significance in many indigenous North American traditions, associated with water, fertility, transformation, and the underworld. The Haudenosaunee Iroquois have stories of the great serpent who dwells in lakes and rivers, sometimes helpful, sometimes dangerous, always commanding respect. The Lenape speak of underwater panthers and serpent spirits that govern the flow of water and the seasons. Could the Blackstone Serpent be a physical embodiment of such a being, a way of anchoring myth to landscape? Dr. Carolyn Westfield, an ethnohistorian at Penn State, thinks so. She points out that the serpent's head terminates at a spring-fed creek that never runs dry, even in the driest summers, a natural feature that would have been critically important to any agricultural community. By building the serpent with its head drinking from this permanent water source, the builders might have been expressing gratitude, ensuring continued abundance, or ritually binding the spirit of the serpent to the land. It's the kind of symbolic logic that makes sense within animistic worldviews, where natural features are alive, conscious, and capable of reciprocal relationships with humans. And then there's the curse. According to local lore collected in the 1920s by folklorist Ernest Mathers, early Euro-American settlers in the area avoided the serpent, believing it brought bad luck to anyone who disturbed it. Mathers recorded multiple stories of farmers who tried to plow through the earthwork and subsequently suffered crop failures, livestock deaths, or mysterious illnesses. One tale, told by a descendant of German immigrants who settled the valley in the 1780s, describes a man named Johann Krebs who decided to flatten part of the serpent to expand his cornfield. Within a week, Krebs reportedly developed severe respiratory problems, coughing up blood, and died within the month. His family abandoned the farm, and the land reverted to forest. Now, it's easy to dismiss such stories as superstition, coincidence transformed into cautionary tale. But they reveal something important. The serpent was recognized as significant, even by people who had no cultural connection to the builders, and that significance carried a sense of danger, of boundary that shouldn't be crossed. Whether that's evidence of some lingering spiritual power or simply human psychology projecting meaning onto landscape, I'll leave for you to decide. But the stories persist. What truly haunts me about the Blackstone Serpent is its isolation. There are no villages, no burial mounds, no other major earthworks within 5 miles of the site. It sits alone in its valley, a singular monumental gesture in an otherwise archaeologically quiet landscape. Who gathered to build it? Where did they come from, and where did they go afterward? Was this a pilgrimage site, a place visited seasonally by groups from distant settlements? Or was there once a thriving community nearby, its traces erased by centuries of plowing and development? Modern surveys using ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry have revealed faint anomalies, possible post holes, fire pits, and midden deposits, scattered within a few hundred yards of the Serpent, suggesting at least temporary occupation, but nothing substantial enough to indicate a permanent village. It's as if the Serpent was built, used for a time, and then simply left behind, its purpose fulfilled or forgotten. We still don't know. The site is now protected as part of a state forest, accessible only by hiking trail, and that's probably for the best. The earthwork remains intact, its grassy coils winding through the trees, a testament to vision and labor we can measure but not fully comprehend. When you walk its length at dawn, when mist rises from the creek and the first light catches the ridges in the distance, you might just catch a glimpse of what its builders saw, a landscape alive with meaning, every feature charged with significance, and the Serpent as their way of saying, "We were here, we understood, and this is what mattered." Our next stop takes us deep into the northern tier, to Potter County, where the rugged Allegheny Plateau gives way to steep-sided valleys carved by the glacial retreat 10,000 years ago. Here, in a remote hollow accessible only by logging roads and foot trails, lies one of Pennsylvania's most enigmatic sites, the Kettle Creek Lithic Field, a scatter of over 3,000 worked stone pieces spread across roughly 8 acres of forest floor. At first glance, it looks like a massive flint knapping workshop, a place where ancient knappers sat and produced stone tools in industrial quantities. But look closer, and the picture doesn't quite add up. The lithics, flakes, blades, cores, and preforms, are overwhelmingly made from a distinctive black chert that outcrops 30 miles to the south, not locally. The technological style is all over the map, exhibiting attributes of Paleo-Indian, archaic, and woodland traditions all mixed together, suggesting either multi-temporal use spanning 8,000 years or something else entirely. And most puzzling of all, there's almost no debitage. The tiny waste flakes produced during knapping that should vastly outnumber finished or nearly finished pieces. It's as if someone brought thousands of stone tools to this spot, carefully arranged them, and then walked away. What you're looking at isn't a workshop. It's a mystery wrapped in stone. The site was first documented in 1967 by amateur archaeologist Frank Desmond, who was fly fishing in Kettle Creek when he noticed flint flakes eroding from a stream bank. Over the next 5 years, Desmond systematically walked the surrounding hillsides, flagging and mapping every visible lithic piece. His hand-drawn maps, later digitized and analyzed by professional archaeologists, revealed distinct clusters, a concentration of large biface preforms near an old oak grove, a scatter of small projectile points along a ridgeline, and a dense pile of blade cores at the base of a sandstone boulder. None of this distribution matches what you'd expect from a workshop, where debitage should radiate from central knapping stations and finished pieces should be transported away for use. Instead, it looks almost curated, as if someone deliberately placed different tool types in different locations according to some logic we don't understand. Dr. Kenneth Harrow from Mansfield University led excavations in 1981, opening 6 test units in the highest density areas. What he found only deepened the mystery. The lithics weren't buried, they were all sitting on or within the top few inches of soil, with no stratigraphy, no distinct cultural layers, nothing to indicate they'd been deposited over millennia as you'd expect from a repeatedly occupied workshop. Typological analysis of the projectile points revealed an astonishing diversity. Paleo-Indian style fluted points similar to Clovis forms, dating to roughly 11,000 BC. Archaic period corner-notched and stemmed points spanning 8,000 BC to 1,000 BC. Woodland triangular points from 900 C to 1500 C. All in the same surface scatter, all made from the same black chert. How is that possible? If this were a simple workshop used repeatedly over 10,000 years, you'd expect to see changes in raw material preference, in knapping technology, in discard patterns. But the black chert is consistent, and the technological sophistication of the pieces doesn't show the expected chronological progression. Some researchers, like Harrow, suggest that the site is actually much younger than the point styles suggest, that late prehistoric knappers were deliberately recreating archaic and Paleo-Indian styles, perhaps for ceremonial purposes or as a way of connecting to ancestral traditions. This idea, that ancient people engaged in archaeology of their own past, collecting and reproducing old stone tool forms, is supported by ethnographic examples from other cultures. But it requires us to believe that detailed knowledge of knapping techniques from cultures separated by thousands of years was somehow transmitted and preserved, which strains credulity. An alternative theory, proposed by Dr. Lillian Cross in a 2003 paper, is that the Kettle Creek lithic field represents a ritual deposit, a deliberate offering or consecration of stone tools collected from various sources across the landscape and brought to this specific location for spiritual purposes. Cross points to the sandstone boulder at the heart of the site, a 10-foot-tall erratic deposited by glacial action, as the likely focal point. The boulder's surface is covered in shallow cup marks, small, bowl-shaped depressions pecked into the stone, a type of petroglyph found across eastern North America and associated with ritual activity. If the boulder was recognized as a sacred place, perhaps a dwelling place of spirits or ancestors, then the lithic scatter could be offerings, each tool carrying the labor and intention of its maker, laid down as gifts or prayers. Cross notes that many of the larger bifaces show evidence of intentional breakage, snapped in half or with the tip deliberately removed, a practice documented ethnographically as killing a tool to release its spirit. It's a provocative interpretation, one that reframes the site from utilitarian workshop to sacred landscape, but like so many theories in archaeology, it's difficult to prove without corroborating evidence. The black chert itself adds another layer to the puzzle. Sourcing studies using X-ray fluorescence and petrographic analysis traced it to a single outcrop in Clearfield County, a formation known locally as the Onyx Ridge Quarry. Archaeological surveys at that quarry have found extensive evidence of prehistoric extraction, quarry pits, knapping debris, broken hammerstones, dating from the Paleo-Indian period through to European contact. This was clearly a valued resource, exploited over millennia, and its stone traveled far. Black chert artifacts from the Onyx Ridge source have been found in sites across Pennsylvania, into New York and Ohio, evidence of long-distance trade networks or seasonal mobility. But the concentration of Onyx Ridge chert at the Kettle Creek site is unparalleled. Why bring so much to this one remote location? Was there something special about this valley, this boulder, that made it worth the effort of transporting hundreds of pounds of stone tools 30 miles across rough terrain? The forest offers no obvious answers. The site sits on a slight rise, well-drained but otherwise unremarkable, with no commanding views, no proximity to major waterways, nothing that screams, significant place, to modern sensibilities. But significance isn't always about practicality. Sometimes it's about history, about stories told and retold until a place becomes saturated with meaning. And here's where the tale takes a darker turn. Local tradition, recorded in the early 20th century, speaks of the Giant's Treasure, a cache of stone axes supposedly buried somewhere in the Kettle Creek area by a race of giants who lived in the hills before the Indians arrived. According to the stories, these giants were master stone workers, able to shape flint with their bare hands, and they left behind hordes of weapons and tools when they were driven out by the smaller people who came after. It's classic frontier mythology, the kind of tall tale spun around campfires and exaggerated with each retelling, but it latched onto the Kettle Creek site once word of the lithic scatter spread. Treasure hunters have periodically visited the area, digging haphazard holes and disturbing the archaeological context in search of the fabled cache. It's infuriating from a scientific standpoint. Each unauthorized dig destroys information we can never recover. But it's also a reminder of how archaeological sites exist in cultural space, not just scientific space. People need stories to make sense of the past, and sometimes those stories have more power than facts. We still don't know what the Kettle Creek lithic field truly represents. Workshop, ritual deposit, territorial marker, ancestral shrine, all remain possibilities, none proven. The site is now under state protection, and access is restricted to prevent further damage, but the stones remain where they were found, scattered across the forest floor like frozen words in a language we've forgotten how to read. Now we turn our attention westward, to the valleys of Clarion County, where the Allegheny River meanders through sandstone bluffs and forested bottomlands that seem timeless in their quiet beauty. But in 1889, during flood mitigation work along Piney Creek, laborers uncovered something that shattered that timelessness: a log crib structure, submerged beneath 6 feet of alluvial deposits, constructed from massive white oak timbers notched and fitted with remarkable precision. When archaeologists finally excavated the site in the 1920s, they dated the wood to approximately 200 BC using dendrochronology, making it one of the oldest preserved wooden structures in the eastern United States. This is the Piney Creek Weir, and it raises a question that still provokes debate. What were early woodland people doing with hydraulic engineering that sophisticated? The structure is massive, over 200 feet long, angling across what would have been the main channel of Piney Creek at the time of construction, creating a funnel that directed water flow toward a narrow gap fitted with a removable gate system. The oak logs, some of them 18 inches in diameter and 30 feet long, were notched and joined without nails or metal fasteners, using only mortise and tenon joinery and wooden pegs. The level of carpentry skill on display is impressive by any standard. But what truly astonishes is the scale of the project. Constructing this weir would have required felling and shaping dozens of mature oaks, transporting them to the creek, no small feat given that some likely weighed over a ton, and assembling them underwater or in low water conditions, all using stone tools and presumably human labor alone. Dr. Robert Finley from Clarion University estimated that the project would have required at least 50 people working full-time for 3 to 4 months. That implies a level of social organization and surplus labor that doesn't fit the standard model of early woodland society, which we typically describe as small, mobile bands without permanent leadership structures. So what was the weir for? The most straightforward answer is fish harvesting. Wooden weirs are a well-documented technology across indigenous North America, used to trap migrating fish, salmon, shad, eels, sturgeon, during seasonal runs. By funneling fish toward a narrow gap, you can station people there with nets or spears and harvest huge quantities with relatively little effort. For societies dependent on seasonal resources, a structure like this could mean the difference between lean winters and plenty. The Piney Creek watershed historically supported runs of American shad, which migrate upstream from the Atlantic each spring to spawn, and white suckers, which move into tributary streams in early spring. A well-placed weir could harvest thousands of fish in a matter of weeks, providing protein that could be dried, smoked, and stored. Finley's excavations recovered fish bones from the site, predominantly shad and sucker, supporting the fishing theory. But there's a problem. The sheer scale of the Piney Creek weir seems like overkill for a seasonal fishing operation. Ethnographic and archaeological examples of fish weirs from later periods are typically much smaller, simpler structures that could be built and maintained by a single extended family. Why invest so much labor in something so monumental? An alternative interpretation, proposed by Dr. Angela Moretti in 1994, is that the weir served a dual purpose: practical fishing but also territorial marking and social prestige. Building something this large, this permanent, makes a statement. It says, "We control this resource, this place is ours, and we have the organizational capacity to do things no one else can." In societies without centralized political authority, monuments can serve as mechanisms for building and displaying collective identity. The act of construction itself, gathering labor, coordinating effort, overcoming technical challenges, becomes a bonding experience that reinforces group cohesion and establishes status hierarchies. The weir would have been visible evidence of that collective achievement, something subsequent generations could point to and say, "Our ancestors built this." Moretti suggests that the people who built the Piney Creek weir were asserting a shift from mobile hunter-gatherer lifeways toward more territorial, sedentary patterns, and the weir was both tool and symbol of that transition. It's a compelling argument, one that fits with broader trends in eastern North America during the early woodland period. When pottery appears, burial practices become more elaborate, and trade networks expand, all signs of increasing social complexity. But let's not ignore the enigmatic details that don't fit neatly into either theory. Embedded within the weir's structure, archaeologists found 47 small carvings on the timber surfaces, abstract symbols, mostly geometric patterns like chevrons, lattices, and spirals, along with a few stylized animal forms that might be turtles or fish. These carvings were made before the timbers were installed, as some of the marks are positioned in ways that would have been inaccessible after assembly. Were they maker's marks, identifying which person or family contributed which log? Were they protective symbols, intended to ensure the weir's success or ward off malevolent spirits? Or were they something else entirely, a symbolic language we no longer understand? No one knows. The carvings have no clear parallels in other early woodland art, and their meaning remains locked away. Additionally, at the downstream end of the weir, excavators found a cache of 43 quartz crystals, each carefully shaped into a roughly spherical form and deposited in a clay-lined pit. Quartz has widespread ritual significance among indigenous North American groups, associated with clarity, purity, and spiritual power. But why place them here, at a fish weir? Was this an offering, a way of blessing the structure and ensuring abundant harvests? Or was the weir itself secondary, and the real purpose of the site was ritual, with fishing as a practical side benefit? The more you dig, literally and figuratively, the more questions emerge. The site's preservation is a stroke of luck. Sometime around 150 BC, the Piney Creek channel shifted during a major flood, and the weir was buried under layers of silt and clay that sealed it in anaerobic conditions, preventing the oak timbers from rotting. For over 2 millennia, it lay hidden, perfectly preserved in the absence of oxygen, until rising water tables during the 1889 flood caused bank collapse and exposed the timbers. Today, only about 30 feet of the structure remains fully intact. The rest was dismantled or degraded before archaeological significance was recognized, but what survives is housed in a controlled environment at the State Museum of Pennsylvania, where you can still see the notching marks left by stone adzes and the smooth wear patterns from centuries of water flow. It's a tangible connection to people who lived and worked here 2,200 years ago, their ingenuity and effort frozen in wood. We still don't know how they learned such sophisticated carpentry, whether it was indigenous innovation or knowledge brought from elsewhere through trade and cultural exchange. We don't know if the Piney Creek weir was unique, or if there were others like it, long since vanished, scattered across the waterways of Pennsylvania. And we don't know what those carved symbols meant, or why quartz spheres were buried beneath rushing water. But what we do know is this: we've underestimated these people. They were capable, creative, and ambitious in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. Let's move now to the windswept plateau of Bradford County, where in 1952 a geology student named Catherine Hollis made a discovery that would occupy her entire professional career and still leaves us grasping for answers. She was mapping glacial erratics, boulders transported and deposited by ice sheets during the Pleistocene, when she noticed something unusual about one particular stone near the village of Windham. The boulder, a metamorphic gneiss weighing approximately 8 tons, sat atop a raised earthen platform that was clearly human-made, and its surface was covered, and I mean absolutely covered, with incised lines forming intricate geometric patterns, interconnected triangles, hexagons, spirals, and what appear to be star charts. This is the Windham Sky Stone, and after 70 years of study, we still can't agree on whether those carvings represent ancient astronomy, sacred geometry, or something we haven't even considered. The platform itself is significant. Built from layered clay and gravel, it raises the boulder about 4 feet above the surrounding grade and is oriented precisely north-south, suggesting intentional astronomical alignment. Excavations around the platform's edges recovered charcoal dating to approximately 600 BC, placing the construction in the late Archaic or early woodland period. But here's the catch: the boulder is a glacial erratic, deposited by retreating ice sheets around 12,000 BC, meaning it sat in this location for thousands of years before someone decided to build a platform for it and cover it with carvings. Why this particular stone? Glacial erratics are common across northern Pennsylvania. You can find them in any farmer's field, so there must have been something special about this one. Hollis noted that the gneiss has a distinctive composition, rich in mica that catches sunlight and makes the stones sparkle. Perhaps that visual quality marked it as sacred, a sky stone, fallen from the celestial realm. Or perhaps its sheer size, nothing within miles comes close to its mass, made it an obvious choice for monumentalization. We're speculating, but the intentionality is clear: this stone mattered. The carvings are where things get truly mysterious. Hollis spent decades documenting every incised line, creating detailed photographic and tactile maps of the stone's surface. She identified over 2,000 individual geometric elements arranged in what appears to be a systematic pattern, though the organizing principle remains elusive. Some researchers see astronomical significance. Dr. Harold Penn, an archaeoastronomer, claims that certain groupings of triangular forms correspond to major constellations visible from Pennsylvania's latitude around 600 BCE: Orion, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia. He argues that the stone functions as a three-dimensional star chart, allowing observers to identify constellations and track stellar motion through the seasons. It's an audacious claim, and Penn has published sideline diagrams showing how specific carved elements align with horizon points where bright stars would rise or set at key dates. But critics point out that you can find alignments anywhere if you look hard enough. The human brain is wired to find patterns, even where none exist. Without independent confirmation, such as written records or oral traditions describing the carvings as star maps, we're on shaky ground. Others focus on the geometric intricacy itself. The hexagons, in particular, are nearly perfect, 6 equilateral triangles joined at a central point, and they repeat across the stone's surface in various sizes, sometimes nested within each other, sometimes linked in chains. Dr. Elena Marsh, a cognitive archaeologist, suggests the carvings represent a sophisticated understanding of geometry and symmetry, possibly tied to ritual numerology or cosmological models. She notes that hexagonal forms appear in natural structures, honeycombs, crystal lattices, snowflakes, and might have held symbolic meaning as representations of natural order or divine creation. In some indigenous North American traditions, geometric patterns aren't decorative but functional, serving as mnemonic devices for oral narratives, maps of spiritual landscapes, or diagrams of relationships between clans and families. Marsh proposes that the Wyndham Sky Stone was a teaching tool, a physical text used to transmit knowledge across generations. Elders would have traced the lines with their fingers or with pointers, telling stories associated with each pattern, embedding cultural knowledge in stones so it couldn't be forgotten. It's a beautiful idea, one that reframes the stone from static monument to dynamic curriculum, but again, without corroboration, it remains conjecture. And then there's the legend. Collected by folklorist James Rutherford in 1968 from elderly residents of Wyndham, the story goes that the sky stone was placed by the first people, giants who walked the earth when it was new and who could speak to the stars. According to the tale, the giants carved the stone to record their conversations with celestial beings, preserving the wisdom they were given about the movements of the heavens and the cycles of life. When the giants vanished, driven away by smaller humans or departed back to the sky, depending on the version, the stone remained, waiting for someone wise enough to read its message. Rutherford was careful to note that these stories might have been influenced by earlier frontier narratives about giants and mound builders, but the motif of celestial communication is interesting. It suggests that the stone was recognized as important, associated with deep antiquity and esoteric knowledge, even by people who had no direct cultural connection to its creators. Whether that recognition stems from genuine oral tradition passed down over centuries or from later mythologizing around a visibly unusual artifact, we can't be sure. What haunts me most about the Wyndham Sky Stone is the labor involved. Stone carving with archaic period tools, hammerstones, antler chisels, sandstone abrasives, is brutally slow work. Modern experimental archaeology suggests that incising a single foot-long line into hardened ice might take 3 to 4 hours of sustained effort. If we extrapolate that to the entire stone, we're talking thousands of hours, possibly tens of thousands, invested in this one monument. That's not casual doodling. That's a multigenerational project, passed from carver to carver, each adding to the work of those who came before. It implies a cultural continuity and commitment that's rare in the archaeological record. And yet, we have no idea what drove it. Was it devotion, an act of worship that earned spiritual merit? Was it historical record, each symbol marking an event or lineage? Was it cosmological map, an attempt to understand and encode the structure of the universe? We still don't know. The sky stone sits today behind protective fencing, too fragile to allow public access, its surface slowly weathering under Pennsylvania's freeze-thaw cycles. Conservationists are working to develop methods to stabilize it, but the clock is ticking. In another century, the carvings might be illegible, their message, whatever it was, lost forever. It's a reminder that archaeology is a race against time, and some mysteries won't wait for us to solve them. Our penultimate stop brings us to the Susquehanna River Valley in Dauphin County, where in 1923 floodwaters exposed a section of riverbank that would become one of Pennsylvania's most controversial archaeological sites. Emerging from the collapsing bank were human skeletal remains, not a few scattered bones but a dense concentration of at least 47 individuals, all buried in a tightly packed cluster within a small area roughly 20 feet in diameter. This is the Rockville Ossuary, and everything about it challenges our understanding of burial practices and social organization in the late woodland period. The bones were interred without grave goods, without individual burial pits, without any of the markers we typically use to interpret social status or ritual practice. They were simply placed together, sometimes overlapping, sometimes articulated skeletons lying side by side, sometimes disarticulated piles of bones mixed together. What could cause such a burial? Mass death from disease? Warfare casualties? Ritual interment of ancestral remains collected from elsewhere? After a century of study, we still can't agree. The initial excavation in 1924, led by Dr. Warren Moorhead from the Phillips Academy, was a chaotic affair by modern standards. Photography was limited, stratigraphic control was minimal, and many of the bones were damaged or lost in handling. But Moorhead did meticulous enough work to establish some basic facts. First, radiocarbon dating of bone collagen places the burials between 1200 C and 1350 C, firmly in the late woodland period. Second, the individuals represent a cross-section of ages and sexes: infants, children, adolescents, adults, elderly, both male and female. This isn't a warrior cemetery or a sacrificial deposit of captives, it's a community. Third, many of the bones show evidence of defleshing before burial, with cut marks consistent with removal of soft tissue, and some show burning, suggesting cremation or exposure to fire. Fourth, there are no grave goods whatsoever, no pottery, no stone tools, no ornaments, which is highly unusual for late woodland burials in this region, where even modest graves typically contain at least a few ceramic vessels or shell beads. So what are we looking at? The most prevalent theory is that the Rockville ossuary represents a secondary burial practice, where bodies were initially buried or exposed elsewhere, allowed to decompose, and then the clean bones were collected and reinterred in a communal grave. This practice is documented among many indigenous North American groups, particularly in the Northeast and Great Lakes regions, where it served to reinforce kinship ties and maintain connections to ancestral lands. The Huron, for instance, conducted Feast of the Dead ceremonies every 10 to 12 years, exhuming remains from temporary burials and reburying them communally, an event that brought together multiple villages and reaffirmed political alliances. Could the Rockville ossuary be evidence of a similar practice among Pennsylvania's late woodland peoples? Dr. Susan Ramirez from Dickinson College thinks so. She argues that the ossuary represents a deliberate communal reburial, possibly associated with village relocation or the merging of multiple kin groups. The absence of grave goods, in her interpretation, reflects the ritual context. This wasn't about individual identity or wealth display but about collective identity, the unity of the group taking precedence over personal distinction. But there's a darker possibility. Several of the skulls show evidence of blunt force trauma, depressed fractures consistent with club or axe blows, and a few long bones have projectile points embedded in them. Warfare was not uncommon in the late woodland period, as population pressures increased and competition for prime agricultural land intensified. Could the Rockville ossuary be a mass grave for victims of a raid or massacre? Dr. Mitchell Hanover, a bioarchaeologist, examined the trauma patterns in detail and concluded that at least 15 individuals show perimortem injuries, injuries sustained at or near the time of death, suggesting violence. But the picture is complicated by the presence of children and infants, who typically aren't direct targets in warfare. Hanover proposes a scenario where a village was attacked, resulting in significant casualties, and the survivors gathered the dead, both those killed in battle and those who died from related causes like starvation during siege or disease in the aftermath, and buried them together. It's a grim interpretation, but it fits the physical evidence. And then there's the enigma of the defleshing. If these individuals died in a massacre, why go to the effort of removing flesh before burial? Defleshing is labor-intensive and typically associated with respectful funerary practices, not with disposal of enemy dead. Some researchers suggest that the ossuary might actually combine two different events: an initial mass death event, warfare, epidemic, famine, followed by a respectful reburial conducted by survivors or relatives sometime later, after the bodies had partially decomposed. The defleshing and burning would then be part of the ritual purification process, cleaning the bones before their final interment. It's a complex scenario, but it accounts for the conflicting evidence better than any single cause explanation. What troubles me most is the absence of oral tradition or historical documentation about this site. Unlike some other regions of Pennsylvania, where 18th century accounts by European travelers or missionaries occasionally mention indigenous burial practices, the Susquehanna Valley at Rockville has no such records. We're left with bones and earth and questions we may never answer definitively. Local legend, naturally, has filled the void. Stories collected in the 1930s speak of the Field of Bones, a cursed place where the spirits of the dead still walk, seeking vengeance or peace, depending on the teller. Farmers in the early 20th century reportedly avoided plowing the area, and children were warned not to play near the riverbank. When the ossuary was excavated and the bones removed to museum storage, some community members expressed relief, believing the disturbance had released the spirits. Others insisted it had only angered them further. These beliefs shaped how the site was remembered and influenced local resistance to further archaeological work. It's a reminder that archaeological sites don't exist in isolation. They're embedded in living communities with their own histories and beliefs, and those beliefs deserve respect even as we pursue scientific understanding. The Rockville ossuary bones are now housed at the State Museum of Pennsylvania, where they've been subjected to increasingly sophisticated analyses, isotope studies to determine diet and geographic origin, ancient DNA extraction to explore kinship and population affinity, pathology assessments to identify disease. Each new technology offers the possibility of answers, but so far, the bones have kept their secrets. We still don't know with certainty why 47 people ended up buried together in that narrow space. We don't know if they all died at once or over time, if they were kin or strangers, if their burial was an act of grief or expedience. And that uncertainty, that irreducible mystery at the heart of the human past, is both frustrating and strangely compelling. It reminds us that history isn't a neat narrative we can fully recover. It's a fragmentary mosaic with pieces missing, and sometimes the gaps tell us as much as the pieces themselves. Finally, we journey to the northwestern reaches of Pennsylvania, to Erie County, where the ancient shorelines of glacial Lake Erie carved terraces into the landscape and left behind a heritage of human activity stretching back over 10,000 years. In 1978, during construction of a shopping complex near the town of Girard, bulldozers struck a buried stone feature that brought work to a halt and archaeologists rushing to the site. What they uncovered was a stone circle, 43 boulders, each weighing between 200 and 600 pounds, arranged in an ellipse measuring 60 feet along the major axis and 48 feet along the minor axis, with a single large flat stone at the center. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from beneath the central stone yielded a date of approximately 2300 BC, placing it in the late Archaic period. This is the Girard Stone Ring, and it's the only monument of its kind in Pennsylvania, a solitary enigma that refuses to fit neatly into our understanding of Archaic period society. The stones themselves are glacial erratics, boulders of Canadian shield granite and gneiss carried south by ice sheets and dumped across the Erie Plain when the glaciers retreated. They're not local bedrock, which means they were available on the landscape, but moving them, even rolling them short distances, would have been significant work. Arranging 43 of them in a precise geometric pattern speaks to intention and planning. But for what purpose? The most obvious parallel is to stone circles elsewhere: Stonehenge in England, the stone rings of Scotland and Ireland, even the medicine wheels of the Plains tribes. But direct comparisons are tricky because we're dealing with vastly different time periods, cultures, and contexts. Still, certain commonalities emerge. Many stone circles are associated with astronomical observations, seasonal ceremonies, or burial practices. The Girard stone ring shows evidence of all three. The ellipse's major axis aligns closely with the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset, suggesting solar tracking. The central flat stone bears traces of burning and was surrounded by a deposit of cremated human bone fragments from at least 3 individuals, indicating funerary use. And the site's position on a raised terrace overlooking what would have been the shoreline of early Lake Erie gives it a commanding view, the kind of location that feels significant, where sky meets water meets land. Dr. Thomas Kellogg, who led the excavations in 1978 and 1979, proposed that the Girard stone ring functioned as a seasonal ceremonial center, a place where dispersed archaic bands gathered at key times of the year, perhaps solstices or equinoxes, to conduct rituals, exchange goods, arrange marriages, and affirm social bonds. The cremation burials, in his view, represent individuals of high status or ritual importance, honored by being interred at the center of this sacred space. Kellogg noted that similar patterns of seasonal aggregation are documented ethnographically among hunter-gatherer societies worldwide and make adaptive sense. During most of the year, small bands can exploit resources more efficiently by remaining mobile and dispersed, but periodic gatherings allow for social cohesion, information exchange, and ritual renewal. The stone circle would serve as a permanent marker of the gathering place, a landmark visible across the landscape that says, "We meet here, this is our place." It's a compelling model, grounded in comparative anthropology, and it fits the archaeological evidence reasonably well. But alternative interpretations exist. Dr. Francine Caldwell, an archaeoastronomer, argues that the stone ring's primary function was astronomical observation, specifically tracking the lunar cycle. She points out that the ellipse's eccentricity, the degree to which it deviates from a perfect circle, matches the eccentricity of the moon's orbit, and she's identified sidelines from the central stone through gaps between certain outer stones that align with major lunar standstill positions, the extreme northern and southern points where the moon rises over an 18.6-year cycle. If Caldwell is right, the Girard stone ring represents an astonishing level of astronomical knowledge, requiring decades of careful observation to discern the lunar standstill cycle, and then geometric sophistication to encode that knowledge in stone. Critics counter that the sight-line alignments aren't precise enough to be definitive. There's wiggle room of several degrees, which weakens the argument, and that we might be projecting modern astronomical understanding onto a monument that meant something entirely different to its builders. The debate is unresolved and probably unresolvable without additional evidence, but it highlights the interpretive challenges archaeology constantly faces. We have objects, we have contexts, but we don't have the thoughts and intentions of the people who made them. And then there's the mystery of abandonment. The Girard stone ring shows intensive use during the late Archaic period, with multiple episodes of burning, deposition of artifacts, mostly quartz and quartzite scrapers, gravers, and projectile points, and cremation burials spanning roughly 5 centuries from 2300 BCE to 1800 BCE. Then, abruptly, the site goes silent. No early woodland materials, no middle woodland, no late woodland. Nothing. It's as if the site was forgotten or deliberately avoided for the next 3,000 years, until a shopping center bulldozer rediscovered it in 1978. Why? Did the cultural practices that made the ring significant change or disappear? Did the population decline or relocate? Was there some event, a natural disaster, an epidemic, a social upheaval, that made the site taboo? We have no answers. The archaeological record shows continuity of human occupation in the broader Erie region across the woodland periods, so it's not that people left the area entirely. They just stopped using the stone ring, and we don't know why. That kind of cultural rupture, where a monument that clearly mattered for generations suddenly loses significance, is one of the most haunting aspects of archaeology. It reminds us that cultures are dynamic, constantly shifting in response to internal and external pressures, and that even the most sacred places can be forgotten. Local tradition has, unsurprisingly, woven its own narrative around the Girard stone ring. Stories collected in the 1980s speak of the Giants' Council, a gathering place where the first people, described, inevitably, as giants, met to make laws and settle disputes. According to these tales, the central stone was the seat of the chief, and the circle of stones represented the council members, each stone embodying a different clan or family. When the giants departed, the stones remained as a memorial, and those who disturbed them would face the giants' anger. One particularly colorful version claims that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the wind is still, you can hear voices echoing from the stones, speaking in a language no one remembers. It's folklore, of course, shaped by the same frontier mythologies about ancient giants and lost civilizations that we've encountered elsewhere. But like all folklore, it contains a kernel of truth. This place was important, it was about assembly and decision-making, and it connects us to people we can barely imagine. The Girard stone ring is now protected as a historical site, accessible to the public via a short walking trail. The shopping complex was redesigned to preserve the monument, an outcome that wouldn't have been possible even a few decades earlier. When you stand inside the ellipse, especially at dawn or dusk when the light slants low and the shadows lengthen, you can feel the weight of those 34 centuries pressing close. 43 stones, silent witnesses to rituals and gatherings we can only glimpse through fragmentary evidence. It's humbling and inspiring in equal measure. So here we are, having walked together through 7 of Pennsylvania's most enigmatic archaeological mysteries, from the precisely curved stones of Montoursville to the solitary stone ring at Girard, from sealed chambers bearing undeciphered symbols to serpent earthworks winding through valleys, from ancient wooden weirs demonstrating hydraulic sophistication to sky stones covered in geometric riddles, from ossuaries holding the bones of communities we can barely understand to lithic fields, scattered with tools spanning millennia. Each site presents its own puzzle, its own cluster of unanswered questions, its own invitation to wonder. And what links them all is this: they challenge us. They challenge our assumptions about what ancient peoples could do, what they knew, what they cared about. They challenge our narrative timelines, forcing us to acknowledge that cultural complexity doesn't follow a neat evolutionary ladder from simple to sophisticated. They challenge our interpretive frameworks, revealing how much of archaeology is inference built on inference, educated guessing constrained by fragmentary evidence. And they challenge our humility, reminding us that despite all our technology, all our analytical techniques, all our academic theories, there are things we simply don't know and may never know. But here's the thing: that uncertainty isn't a failure. It's an opportunity. Every unsolved mystery is an invitation to keep asking questions, to keep refining our methods, to keep listening to what the past is trying to tell us through the objects and structures it left behind. And more than that, these mysteries remind us of something fundamental about the human condition. We've always been curious, always been builders, always been storytellers seeking to understand our place in the cosmos. The people who carved spirals into limestone caves, who erected serpent earthworks aligned to the solstices, who transported massive stones across miles of rough terrain to construct ceremonial centers, they were us. Different languages, different technologies, different worldviews, but the same fundamental drives: to create meaning, to mark our presence, to leave something behind that says, "We were here, we understood something, this mattered." That continuity across millennia, that thread of human intentionality and creativity, is what makes archaeology more than just an academic exercise. It's how we connect to our shared heritage, how we recognize ourselves in people separated from us by immense gulfs of time. Pennsylvania's hidden secrets, and I've only scratched the surface today. There are dozens more sites we didn't have time to explore, offer us a gift if we're willing to accept it. They offer us wonder. In a world that increasingly feels mapped and measured and explained, where GPS can pinpoint our location to within feet and satellite imagery reveals every corner of the globe, genuine mystery is rare. But it exists, right beneath our feet, in the artifacts and monuments of people whose names we don't know, whose stories we can only partially reconstruct, whose intentions remain tantalizingly just beyond our grasp. That mystery doesn't diminish them. It honors them by acknowledging that they were complex, thoughtful people whose full richness we cannot contain in our neat categories and confident explanations. And it enriches us by keeping alive the possibility of discovery, the thrill of encountering something that doesn't fit, that makes us reconsider, that opens new questions even as it answers old ones. So what do we do with these mysteries? We keep investigating, yes. We apply new technologies. LiDAR scanning revealing hidden earthworks beneath forest canopy, isotope analysis tracing ancient migration routes, ancient DNA unlocking population histories. We conduct new excavations where appropriate, always balancing scientific inquiry with ethical obligations to descendant communities and site preservation. We re-examine old collections in museum storage, asking new questions of old data. But we also do something equally important. We tell the stories. We share these mysteries with each other, not as solved puzzles neatly tied with bows but as ongoing conversations about who we are and where we come from. We visit the sites when we can, walk the same ground ancient feet walked, feel the same sun and wind, imagine ourselves into that distant past with all the empathy and creativity we can muster. We read the research papers, yes, but we also listen to the folklore, attend the local historical society lectures, talk to the farmers and hunters and hikers who know the landscape intimately. We bring our full humanity to the encounter with the past, not just our analytical minds but our emotional and imaginative capacities as well. And perhaps most importantly, we stay open to revision. Every generation brings new perspectives to old evidence, sees patterns previous researchers missed, asks questions that weren't even conceivable decades ago. The Montoursville Stone Crescent that archaeologists in 1916 interpreted as a simple gathering place looks very different to researchers today, who see encoded astronomical knowledge and possible mathematical sophistication. The Girard stone ring that seemed like a random scatter of glacial boulders in the 19th century revealed itself as a precise geometric monument only when excavation and analysis brought its intentional design to light. Who knows what today's mysteries will look like to archaeologists a century from now, armed with technologies and theoretical frameworks we can't even imagine. The humility to admit we don't have all the answers, the openness to being wrong, the willingness to let the past remain partially mysterious. These aren't weaknesses but strengths, signs of a mature discipline that respects both its evidence and its limits. I'll leave you with this thought: Pennsylvania's hidden secrets aren't really hidden. They're right there, in protected sites and museum collections, in published papers and ongoing research projects. What's hidden is only our awareness, our attention, our willingness to look beyond the familiar narratives of colonial history and revolutionary heritage to the deeper, stranger, more mysterious past that underlies them. And that past is everywhere, if you know how to see it. In the curve of a stone wall peeking from beneath topsoil, in the scatter of flint flakes glinting in a plowed field, in the earthen mound rising subtly from a valley floor, in the petroglyphs on a riverside boulder. It's waiting for you, inviting you to wonder, to question, to imagine. Some of Pennsylvania's greatest secrets are still out there, still undiscovered, sleeping beneath forests and farms and suburban developments, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right accident of fate to bring them back into the light. Maybe that person will be you. Maybe the next great mystery will emerge from ground you've walked 100 times without noticing. Keep your eyes open. Keep asking questions. Keep digging, literally or figuratively, because some secrets still lie just beneath your feet, and the story they tell might be the one that changes everything we thought we knew about ancient America. The past isn't finished with us yet. Not even close.